is, if you have never been in it and seen it, it is peer mentoring. So we do have quite a few of our mentors here today. If you want to talk to any of them at the end about any information, if any of our mentors want to raise their hands, those are our people. So we have here to do a lot of really awesome peer mentoring, lots of resources and everything. So if you do want to talk to them towards the end, definitely feel free, even if it's not like I totally want to do this program. Maybe if it's just getting that perspective first, you can definitely do that. But yeah, I'll go ahead and get started. So I do have a quick sign-in. If you would be able to do that, then I'll just go ahead and move this slide.
I got you.
You can also just take a picture of it and just do it. I know it's a little difficult. Yeah, of course. So first, a little bit about me, because I know a lot of you don't know who I am, so I just want to give some background. So my name is Claire Sequoia. I am a first generation college graduate. So I am currently the coordinator of the Success Mentor program, and this will be my third year actually working at UC Merced. And I was actually born and raised in Livingston, in California, so it's like 30 minutes away from here, if anyone's familiar with that. I have my bachelor's in experimental psychology from CSU Stanislaus, and my master's in psychology from CSU Stanislaus as well. And I'm currently doing an educational doctorate program in higher education and student affairs at St. Cloud State University. It's online through Minnesota. So that's a little bit about me. And I know this is kind of what we're all here for. Why are we here to do letters of credit? And then where do we even start? Sometimes that's really intimidating. So there's a lot of different questions you're probably asking, like, how do I prepare? When do I prepare? What do I have to do for it? Who should I ask? What info do I provide? Are there any tools that can help me? So hopefully going over this will give you some information, and if you do have questions towards the end, I can definitely do that. We can have maybe a bit of a conversation to see maybe if there's things that are missing for you, and we can see maybe what can help you most. So first off, I like to start with the getting ready one. So I generally say, although this can also vary depending on the programs or whatnot, I always recommend asking at least 2 months in advance of the deadline, just because you want to give time in case something falls through, in case someone isn't able to write the letter, so you can ask someone else, and also because you're probably doing it while you're also in school, and that's a lot to be going on. So you want to give yourself time, so you can also be working on completing the applications, because a lot of people don't realize you don't need to submit the letters along with the application. You can actually finish the applications and submit them, and then have the letters submitted afterwards, as long as it's by that deadline. So you don't have to wait on them to submit your application. Contacting backup recommenders, that might be something you have to do if life happens. Maybe someone got in an accident or something and they're just not able to do that. Just keep that in mind. Like, don't automatically dismiss the people that you are keeping as backups, because that might come in handy also for another thing. It might be that it's better to ask that person for a specific application. And then sending reminders. A lot is going on, especially for professors, staff. So it's also good to send reminders to people. So during those 2 months, that'll give you the chance to send those reminders and be able to catch if something is coming up for them, or if they're going to need more time, so that maybe you can contact someone and see what you can do. It's also time to have the letters written, because sometimes some people are writing a lot of letters, so they need time to be able to do that along with all their work. And if you don't have 2 months, because I know some of you are probably like, oh my god, I don't have 2 months, now it is time to do it. It's okay, you don't have to panic. I always say just ask as soon as you can, just the question of like, are you able to do that for me? Because just asking, first of all, you'll be able to know if they have that time or not. And also, if you don't have the 2 months, it's also good to think about, do you have enough time to provide all that information to your recommenders? Because it's not only just asking if they can write it, maybe they need to know what to put in it, because they probably do need that information. And then if your recommenders will have enough time to actually write that letter, because that's something to keep in mind too. So I don't recommend asking a week before, because that's really hard, especially if it is a literal letter. Some programs, it's not a letter. Sometimes it's give us your feedback, short questions. But you should be able to see that when you're looking at applications and what they will need to fill out. So those probably don't need the whole 2 months, but if it's a literal letter, that is probably something that they need more time for. So materials. So what I always say that you should be providing your recommenders, as I say required, but you don't always need it, and depending on the program, it might be different. But in general, you probably need to give them the name of the school and the program name, just so that they know who they're addressing it to. An updated resume or CV. If you have never written a resume, or if you're struggling and you have to do a CV for something, definitely reach out to the Career Center. They do that 24/7 over there. They're always looking at resumes. You have to give them the deadlines that you need things by. I always say give them the deadline like a week before the applications actually due, because if something goes wrong, you have time to ask someone else just in case, because things happen, people forget things even with reminders. So if you really want to make sure you're covered, I always recommend, even if it's a few days before, just so you have that covered. How to submit the letters. Sometimes it's them going through a portal and then uploading it. Sometimes they have to answer questions and then they'll ask them for a letter later or something. It's very different for each school, so just check on that, and you might just be like, oh, here's all the links, and they'll just be sent to you. And then any other info that you know will be needed. Usually it'll outline it when you're looking at the portal to ask for the letters, so just keep that in mind too. Some things you may want to provide. Personal statement, that's not required most of the time, but I do recommend it if you haven't known them for too long, or if there's been a bit of a gap that you haven't talked to them, just so you can get some more information to them about maybe why you're wanting to do this, or maybe what has happened these past, few months or something, just to get a better idea of it. But again, if you don't have that ready, that's okay. You don't have to provide it immediately, or you don't have to provide it at all if it's a little bit too personal. Periodical updates. You might realize throughout the application process, like, hey, actually I don't want to apply to this one school. Let them know that, because if they have to write one less letter, it's probably a lot of work taken off their shoulders. Or if you're like, hey, actually this one's not going to work, but I'm switching it to this one. Let them know that, just so that they know what's going on there. And then, like I said, reminders of submitting. And these are some starting questions I always encourage everyone to look at. So the most obvious one I think is like, what schools and programs are you applying to? So that's something you really want to consider before you start asking the question of like, hey, would you write a letter for me? Because they're going to ask, oh, where are you applying? And if you don't have that answer, that doesn't seem very confident yet. When are your applications due? That's probably the follow-up question that they'll have. Even if it's like a general, like, oh, mid-December, that's at least a good estimate to give them, and you can say, hey, I'll follow up with those actual deadlines once I finish up materials and whatnot. And then applications and letters of rec, like I said, they have different deadlines sometimes, so just check on that. I always encourage just to have a little bit of space before the actual deadline for letters of rec. And then asking yourself who you will be asking, and then why them, because sometimes you can say, oh yeah, this person writes letters for people all the time, but is that the strongest letter you can get though, based on your own connections? Just because they write letters for, let's say, everyone, doesn't mean they might be the best option for you. And then, do you have any backups? And there's just some considerations about how to decide where to apply. I know it's easy to say, I'm going to apply to all 12 of these schools that have these majors that I want to do, but it can be expensive. So I always encourage people to say, hey, how much are you budgeting for applications? And if it's not budgeting, it's like, how much more of your financial aid are you going to need to take out to be able to cover those at the end? So just making sure you're not going to go bankrupt just because you're doing applications. So that's really, really important, because costs can add up pretty fast, especially when they're like, oh, now send us your transcript, now send us this thing. Yes.
I'm applying to my grad schools right now to optometry, and I applied to 11 schools, and I'm paying $1,000 just to apply.
Is that each?
No,
okay.
Altogether.
Okay. I was like, oh god. And then I know you have to take other tests.
Yeah,
and
then I also had to take the entry exam with the OAT, and the preparatory courses with it was about $800 just to get the exam.
Yeah, so definitely if you have to take like the GRE, if you have to take another entrance exam for something, keep that in mind, especially if it's something that you might have to take twice, because then it'll really add up. So again, I'm not trying to scare you all, it's just, reality of it. Just make sure you have a general idea of how much you might be spending. Sometimes it's just checking the websites and saying like, okay, how many of these can I feasibly apply to right now? And that's fine, you don't have to apply to all 12 if it's not within your budget. Yes?
Yeah, I was also going to say that it's also important to note that sometimes they offer waivers too, so
Yes.
just keep that in mind.
Yeah, definitely. Some programs will offer waivers based on like If you're in specific programs, the one I know about, but it's like more of like a state university one, it was like TRIO, like student support services ones. But if you're in specific programs, they might offer those. Yes.
If you are looking into waivers for a lot of the entry exams, try to look at it towards the beginning of the year in January, because a lot of the programs that get renewed per year basis, and they give them all out in the beginning of the year. So if you try to get it in like March, it'll probably all be gone. Like, that's what happened to me. It was terrible.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. You know, it's again the realities of it. We're not trying to say like, oh, it's scary, don't do it. We're saying just be prepared that there's a lot of different steps for just any of these processes, unfortunately. And a lot of the times I don't lay out those steps for you. So it's you going there and literally looking yourself and maybe making the phone call and asking them. That's kind of why I tell people, like, if you don't know if it's somewhere that you would be competitive at, make a phone call. Ask them, do you accept people with this grade point average? Like, what is the acceptance rate for that? My friend who, optometry school at the moment, so he was like, okay, he went to UC Davis, he took like one of the hardest programs. His GPA was not the best because of that, but he was like, I really want to do optometry. Where can I actually get into? I don't want to be spending money on all these programs that I won't be able to even be eligible for. So he was literally calling them saying like, hey, this is my GPA, this is what I have for these prereqs. Do you take people that have C's in these? You don't? Okay, next school. And he got in, but again, it took that extra work to say, where are these places that I will apply to that are actually worth it to apply to? Just because it can be very situational. It can be like, hey, I know I can do this, but based on these things, I am not able to apply to this one school. Or maybe it's like retaking a few courses, which he did do like at a community college, because the level of UC Davis for some classes versus a community college was completely different. And then he got A's in those, so they were able to kind of replace those grades. So it's asking those questions too, like, okay, what would make me competitive? Because maybe it's not now. Maybe you're like, hey, let me give it another year, see if I can improve things before I apply. So I think it's just asking those questions, being really honest about like, hey, this is my GPA. Is that something you would apply, like you would look at? Yeah. Did you have your?
Yeah. When it comes to GPA, when you're considering where to apply, just realize that the UC system is inherently harder to get higher grades in compared to other like systems in just California itself. The average like Cal State graduation is somewhere in like the 3.6 if you're a bio major, where if you're at UC, it's somewhere at 3.2.
Mm-hmm.
It is inherently harder to get a good GPA here in the harder courses in the UC system. So if you do get a graduation certificate from the UC, if you have a lower GPA, they're still going to consider you simply because they know that you went to a school that was harder to get good grades in, and you still managed to get a good score.
Yeah, definitely. I think he mentioned that too, that like the one he's at now, University of Missouri St. Louis, that's where he ended up going. They said, oh, we know that you went to UC Davis and then it's a lot harder, so we would take that into consideration. Some of them were honest and were like, we just literally look at the GPA, and if it doesn't meet ours, then it doesn't meet ours. But you won't know that unless you literally ask them sometimes. So again, it's giving them the hard truth sometimes, being like, my GPA is this. Like, do you guys consider that GPA? Like, and this is the situation. Maybe it's talking to a few different people. Maybe they've gone there. You can say like, hey, what was your process getting in? LinkedIn's always a good source to kind of see who goes there, reach out to them, get some information, how their application process went. Also for programs, this might be a little bit more of like for PhD ones, or for master's programs. Sometimes you have to contact professors to see if they are looking for students, because sometimes you can just apply for the program, but it won't tell you if professors are actually looking for students for that program. So I always say, hey, look at what they're doing research on. Do those make sense for what you're doing research on, or for what their program is looking at, and see if they actually have openings for their labs or whatever it is, because a lot of those are literally dependent on if they are taking someone personally. So again, sometimes you have to make those awkward calls, emails, just to get that information, but it'll save you money, it'll save you time and stress when you're actually submitting all that. And also looking at acceptance rates can be a little hard, but sometimes it's, calling and saying like, hey, I saw this, but here's the situation. Or maybe you only see the undergrad one for acceptance rates, we're not showing that one online. It might be asking someone like, hey, how many people got accepted? Like, what was the rate? And here's some tips on who to ask and maybe who to avoid asking. I'll say these are very situational. Sometimes the avoid asking, sometimes that makes sense to ask someone that, but it's very, very situational. So generally, who you'll be asking is people who've seen your abilities and or improvement. So if you've had them, like maybe you've been working in their lab in some capacity and you've had them as a professor your first few years, so they've been able to see you grow, that'd be a really awesome person to get as your recommender. Or maybe it's someone who's been your supervisor and they're, you know, able to see what you're able to do and whatnot, so that's a really good person to ask as well. So in general, I always say supportive supervisors, mentors, professors, staff, etc. And you can also ask coworkers and colleagues, but they also have to have a good insight of your abilities. So if you don't really know too much about, if they don't really know too much about your abilities, I would maybe say that's not a good choice. And in general, I say avoid asking family members because they're very biased. They might not have the full insight of your, you know, scholarly abilities or your abilities of work. They'll just say, yeah, I love them, they're cool, please take them. But if it's a family member, it's really hard to get that really honest, you know, impact. People you haven't connected with in a long time, it might be that, you know, someone reaches, example that I have, which is someone reached out to me asking for a letter that I worked with in undergrad, and I hadn't seen her since or heard anything from her since. And I was like, sure, like, I guess if you really, really need someone, but I was like, you have to send me your resume and give me information about like what you've been doing the past few years so I can have information on that. She never gave me any of that. And then she said, hey, did you do that letter? And I said, not yet. I'm like, did you send me the stuff? She didn't say anything. I'm like, well, I'm gonna just submit, I guess. I know this person from this time and I've known her this many years and she's applying for this. That's all I have. And sometimes that's literally all you can give. So I always encourage you, you know, if someone is saying, hey, could you provide this thing? Follow up with that. Or at least respond and say, hey, I'll get back to you with that. Again, I didn't want to have to write something that was really, really bare bones, but also I had asked for the stuff. She hadn't talked to me in years, and I was like, I mean, I guess if you don't have anyone else, like, I can, but you have to give me information. And she didn't give me information. So I don't know how the application process went for her, but also I think it was something that sometimes you need to try it the first time and figure it out, and then go again for it. And there's nothing wrong with that. I've also done that before too. Potentially unsupportive individuals. So if someone you feel like isn't able to really see you as a positive kind of person to recommend, maybe avoid asking them. If you feel like there might be any sort of reason they might say that you're not fit for this, maybe avoid asking that person. It can be hard to realize that, but I always say just really look at it and see, would they really like support me in this process? Are they going to say positive things about me without a doubt? And then we always love this one, unreliable or flaky connections. If it's someone that just really doesn't respond well, maybe don't choose them. They might be an amazing person. They might have super, super good insight on your abilities, but if they're not answering things and they have a really tough time just submitting things like on time, maybe that's not the right person to ask for this. Maybe it's something else that can provide you that isn't like with the deadline set. And I say avoid asking friends, especially if there's no professional connection there. If there is a professional connection, there is some room for that. But if it's just your friend, they won't have as much of that inside kind of sight to what you can actually do, why you want to do these things. Yes, they're also a friend of yours, but will they be able to say like, hey, in this lab they did this, and this coursework they were able to do all this really cool stuff, and they worked on this thing, and they did this internship. Will they have a lot of insight into that? It would probably just be them listing stuff rather than actually getting into your abilities there. And this is preparing yourself. This can be hard. So having a plan, being ready to answer questions. So if someone that you're asking says, okay, so why are you thinking about this program? Have an answer ready. That's kind of the basic one, but it can be kind of hard to answer that sometimes. Some people will say, well, it's because I want to do this thing, but I don't really know. That's not a good answer. You need to have like a solid answer of why you want to do this. And know what you're applying to. If they ask you, oh, where are you applying, and you don't know, it's probably not a great sign. It doesn't really show them that you're really, really dedicated to that yet. So it's just preparing yourself, at least knowing where you're thinking about applying to, or at least the programs that you're looking at. And just being honest, if you don't specifically know the schools, maybe it's saying, I'm applying to psychiatry programs specializing in this. I'm still finalizing the school list, but the deadlines are about, I don't know, late December to mid-February, something like that. And unfortunately, you do have to prepare yourself for the chance of they say no. I have been told no before. It's just one of those things. It's not always probably the best feeling, and like I will say, when I was told no, I was like, why? Like, oh my god. But, you know, some people just either don't write letters very much, and that's a personal choice of theirs. They're not required to write letters. I think that's something that a lot of people don't realize. Someone does not have to write you a letter just because they work here or they're a professor or something. That doesn't mean they have to write you a letter. So I think it's just something to keep in mind. I would hope that they would be willing to write a letter for anyone who has, you know, shown their abilities, but sometimes that's just not the type of people they are. So I just encourage you, just be prepared to hear no. It's probably nothing personal if that is the case. But if they are very honest, then just take that feedback and say, okay, how can I use this experience for when I ask someone else later down the line? So I know why they told me no, and I can improve on that later. And again, have backups ready. Because again, like I said, I was told no. I was like, oh my god, who am I gonna ask now? Those were my 3 people. And I had to kind of scramble and figure it out. So definitely at least have an idea of who you can ask as backup, because you never know, like I said, something might also happen life-wise that they're not able to do it. Asking the question, this can be the hardest part. Just literally asking them. It's intimidating, it's scary. If you don't see them in person all the time, I recommend, you know, sending an email first. Clearly and concisely asking them to meet. Doesn't have to be this huge email because they're probably not going to read the whole thing. It can be like, hey, I just wanted to meet up soon. It can be part of a check-in. Maybe it's a one-on-one if they're your supervisor. Maybe it's saying, hey, would you have time to meet over coffee so I can discuss something with you? That's fine. You can ask to meet in person or Zoom if they're not available to meet in person. And if it's not possible to meet, just be clear with your request in the email response. Because sometimes they're like, I just don't have the capacity to meet right now. Is it something we can talk about over emails? And you can say, yes, actually, you know, I'm sorry that you weren't able to meet, but I did want to ask you if you'd be able to, you know, write me a letter. Like, very concise. It doesn't have to be this gigantic essay in there because they will not read all that. I will tell you that. I've gotten those before and I'm like, okay, just give me the bullet points of this because it's a lot of information sometimes. That's more of like the personal statement if you do want to send them that. So if you are meeting them in person or over Zoom, if it's part of another meeting, so I suggest addressing the other topics first, just so that you get those out of the way. We don't impede on what they're wanting to talk about, like if it's a check-in, don't impede on what they're trying to check in with you about. And then asking after that, so you have the time for that back and forth of questions and you're able to do that. If you do want to make sure to get to it, maybe let them know, like at the end, I do have a question, if we can get to that before we part ways. Maybe that's a way to kind of build that in there. And then answering questions to the best of your ability. So if they're asking you stuff, like I said, if you don't have the full answer, give them what you know and be honest with it and say like, hey, here's the reality of this is what I'm looking at. I would love your support, and this is what I can give you once I have that ready, made, whatever it is. And then if they tell you like, yes, I would love to write you a letter, follow up with your resume or your CV. If you have a CV, you know what that is. If you don't, that's okay. Application, deadline, info, etc. So you definitely want to follow up with that after the meeting. It doesn't have to be immediately after, especially if you're still putting some of that together. And I have some what ifs here, because sometimes I get these. So, what if you haven't finished your applications? That's okay. It's alright. Just start asking. The sooner you ask, like, obviously I'm not telling you to ask like a year before, because they will absolutely forget about that, and you probably will too. As soon as you know you're gonna need that letter, I would say like think about how you want to ask them and get ready to ask them that question. because you don't have to have your application finished in order to ask. I know people who have been like, I'm still struggling to finish my application, so I still haven't asked that person, and it's like a weekend, and I was like, whoa, no, you need to have asked already, so they're able to do that in time, not based on your application, which is why they're not connected. So if you don't have a personal statement done, like I said, you don't need to have it done to ask the question. If it's something that they do want, you can provide it later if you're able to. If it's something that maybe you're like, it's very, very personal, I don't know if it's something I want to provide right now, just be honest about it. Hopefully if they're someone who is really supportive of you, they will be able to accept that it's just maybe really, really personal. And then if you're still finalizing materials, again, that does not mean you can't ask. I would encourage you to still ask already. Just letting them know like, hey, once I have all of, my personal statement together, once I have things finalized, I will send that over to you. And I also just have some tips and suggestions for getting it done. Plan out reminders to be sent to your recommenders. Maybe it's like, okay, in the next 2 months leading up to this, maybe it's like at the end of each month, it's checking in and saying, hey, I just wanted to see, like, make sure that was still something you'd be able to do, or if you have updates to let them know that. So I usually say like 2 reminders beforehand, and then if you really need to send one, like, you probably should ask them the day before too, just in case they haven't already submitted, but you should be able to see if they have or not. But if they haven't, that day before, sometimes it's being like, hey, it's due like tomorrow, which is why I also tell you to give that gap a few days, just in case something does happen, you have that gap. And then keeping track of links. There can be a lot of links. I'm sure you have seen the links for, it can get crazy. So for each application, if it's asking for 3 recommenders, and that's times 10, that's 30 different links. So sometimes it's just making a chart, which hopefully this planner that I give you guys helps out with that too. And it's saying, okay, these people were all given these links. If I need to resend those, does that platform let me just hit resend, or do I have to go get it myself, send it to them, whatever it might be. So it's just knowing that for yourself too. Again, they're probably the same recommenders, but sometimes you might have different recommenders for different programs, just because maybe they're a better fit for one or the other. So just organizing will save you a lot of stress. And something that isn't required, but again, I do want to encourage it just because this isn't something that they have to do for you, is thanking your recommenders. I don't think a lot of people realize just how much time and how many letters they have to do sometimes. So just giving appreciation, it doesn't have to be like you're giving them a gift or something. Sometimes it's just a really simple card of like, I just want to thank you so much for your support. I'll let you know once I hear about things. Or maybe it's like, yeah, these didn't work out, but I do appreciate your support, and I hope in the future that when I apply again, that you'll be able to help me again. Whatever it might be. Again, it can be as simple as just a really quick thank you card, because I think it goes a long way, and it helps you keep those connections as well. And that is what I have on my end. Do you have any questions right now? Yes.
Can we get the presentation emailed to us?
I think Luis is recording it, so I'll try to post it on our website.
Okay.
You can probably stop recording.
Okay.
Thank you.